and then the rest of it I'm playing. And then we can talk about the court cases and stuff and all that sort of stuff. So the book, I guess the book first of all, I'm interested in this because I ghost wrote a book once, and I'm interested in the process of that first of all. And this is just kind of really for my benefit, I suppose. But how did that work? So you had this idea, because it struck me that it's sort of some of the book, or maybe the reason for it, was a sort of your chance to say your bit. Because it came out, is that right? The timeline was sort of such that it came out after all this stuff happened.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's after the case in England.
Yeah.
And when I came back to the States, I had wanted to have the story written about what had gone on in England, because I'd felt that what had been reported in the press was inaccurate. So I wanted to tell my version of the events. But I came back, and every time I kind of thought about it, and then was like, let me just see if I can find a writer. I just was, I thought, well, maybe let's just leave it alone for the time being and not do anything, and let's just focus on building up my practice and just getting back into work, and it'll kind of disappear and not continue to be an issue. But then when it came up again, and it continued to come up,
and this is when the board found out that of the stuff that happened in England, and they called you up for this hearing.
Yes. Well, that was when I first came back, which was in 2001.
Yeah.
And then they found out, and then I got called up for a hearing, and I had my license suspended for 6 months. And then I came back into practice in June 2004. And so, I thought at that point it was all done and dusted. It had been dealt with. I paid my price for whatever it was that I was meant to have committed and done, and then I would move on. But then from 2004 to 2012, it continued to be an issue. I mean, with patients, with other doctors, just with people. I mean, they would, come in and they would Google you, and so it was there, but it wasn't. It was kind of. It was at a point where it wasn't so overwhelming that I just couldn't deal with it by ignoring it.
Well, sorry, just on that sort of subject. I mean, people do use the internet all the time now, and I mean, they use it for diagnosing their own conditions and stuff as well. But when they'd Google you just to sort of do their due diligence, what did they say? And were they, they obviously still wanted to come in and have that consultation, so it didn't frighten them off. But
no. Well, patients would come in. What usually happened was they would print off everything that they find on the internet, and then they would come in and they would present me with it. And so then I would sit down and explain to them the circumstances around the case, and I would say, listen, you're reading something off the BBC website or the Telegraph website about, me being prosecuted and convicted of manslaughter, and then I would go into, what actually happened with the case in England, and how it was dealt with by the New Jersey Medical Board, and about the differences in the legal system between the States and the UK. And so I would take a while to explain to patients what had gone on. And after I had done this, they felt comfortable to continue treating with me.
My understanding is that in the US, you wouldn't have been prosecuted for manslaughter because it doesn't happen like that in the US, does it?
No, it doesn't. You're right, it doesn't.
No.
If that case had happened in the US, at the most, it would have been a medical malpractice lawsuit. It would not have been dealt with, as a criminal prosecution, as it was in the UK.
Are doctors protected from criminal prosecutions for stuff that happens in their line of work? Then how does it?
It doesn't happen because the legal the legal definition of manslaughter in the States and the burden and the standards of proof are very different. That they just wouldn't be applicable to a situation where a doctor was looking after a patient and the patient died.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, that was my fault for interrupting you because you were talking about the book, and then we moved on to something else.
So anyway, so with the book, there'd always been that. I always had that inclination to want to write about the case in England because of what I've just explained, and then when the New Jersey Medical Board suspended my license in 2012 and used the case in England as like the headliner, the banner, even though they had dealt with it, they had known about it, I'd been penalised, it was a deal, it was all in the past, they brought it up and used it to basically catch everyone's attention and say, look, see, here's this bad guy, we're going to suspend his license for some nonsense about qualifications and training. At that point, I thought, I really need to put down in writing my version of events and what happened in the UK, so that I'm not having to explain to everyone all the time what went on. And also that when people Google me, they now have an opportunity to see that, it's not, we're calling it manslaughter, and it's a fairly ugly word, but it's what's considered manslaughter in the States or in the UK are two different things.
Okay, and then how did you meet up with Angelique, right?
Yeah, Angelique.
How did that happen?
That was, it was completely random actually. A friend of mine who was in Manhattan, he worked in one of these communal working spaces, and one day he said, come down and meet me for lunch, and I went down, and Angelique was down there, and she got talking to me, and she's just recently arrived in the States, and she was trying to put together work for herself, and so I had this idea about doing a video because it was at that time that there'd been the Hurricane Sandy storm. So I said, look, it would be good to do a little video for the people who've been affected in New Jersey. So we talked, and she did that project. And
what do you mean by video? Sorry, what sort of video?
To go down to the shore and to film people whose houses had been impacted by the storm, because I was thinking of doing a fundraiser to help those people.
Yeah.
So I wanted to have a short film for the fundraiser.
Yeah.
So that's how I met her, and that's how we initially interacted. And then, after a few weeks, she obviously Googled me as well when she first started, and after a few weeks, I started talking to her. And I said, I've been thinking about having my story or what happened to me in the UK put down in writing, and would you be interested in doing it? Even though she hadn't, ever written the book before.
Yeah.
And even though there were, maybe if I had done it in a sort of a less hurried way, she wouldn't have been the one I chose, but I chose her, and we came together, and she collected the information about what had gone on and about my life.
So like sort of interview like this, like a sort of interview pro. How did that work?
Like an interview. Yeah, I mean, I was living in the city at the time, and she came over to the apartment every day for about 2 weeks, and we went through everything in my life from kind of beginning up until the end of 2011, and then she went away for a couple of weeks and actually wrote the story, and then had it looked at by one or two editors.
But it's sort of, it reads like, it's your biography, autobiography essentially, because it's sort of written in first person.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is Vanessa? Do you know if Vanessa is still here?
No, she's not. You speak to Annetta. She's there at the front desk.
Okay, there's no one here. So I just wondered. Do you know if they're here today? Or?
Oh, Vanessa will be back here probably in about an hour.
Okay. Sorry to bother you. I'll check then.
Sorry. Yeah. Does that throw you off as well?
Yeah, it did. It's odd. The door's closed, right? It's like it's closed for a reason.
Because it reads like I guess the sort of question was really about the sort of process and stuff, because it reads like a autobiography. I mean, it's written in the first person, and it sounds like you. Not that I'd heard your voice before, but it sounds like you speaking. I mean, it's
it's a little bit, the format and the style is I must admit it's a little bit confusing. Is it a biography, an autobiography?
Yeah. That's
so
where I was going.
And I think that's partly due to the fact that Angelique. It was, to all her credit, she did, the best that she could, because it was her first job.
Yeah.
So I think part of that is due to, her inexperience in the process. So that's why it comes across as a little bit, what exactly is it?
Yeah. No, I mean, it kind of, the story's still there.
Yeah.
It's just, I just wanted to kind of, but you essentially hired her as a ghostwriter.
Correct.
That's pretty much the deal. And I just wanted to ask you about the decision to, because this was a little bit confusing for me, only because a lot of the stuff that has happened is sort of in the public domain. I mean, even down to the manslaughter, what happened in the case in London. Obviously, all this stuff here. Not that you really went into that because that was after I guess, but you chose to to change names. Of even things like the General Medical Council is called the Royal Medical Council.
Yeah.
And what was the decision there? I mean, to sort of change everything. I mean, did you just decide, well, rather than just change one or two things, I might as well just do?
It was Angelique's decision.
Okay.
Because she was concerned about being sued.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that was her decision. I, to be honest with you, for me, I wanted to keep things, as they were.
Okay.
But she.
No, that was just. I mean, it wasn't. It was just to sort of clarify for me, really, because I think that, I read it as a sort of rebuttal. I think to a lot of this stuff. And then I was sort of thinking, particularly the detail you go into about the case in London. I was thinking, well, this is, your version of events, and for it to stand up, I mean, why not use the real names? Because this is sort of really what you said happened. I mean, it's sort of
right, and that was a discussion that I had with Angelique at the time, but it went back and forth. And,
just decided to. Yeah. That makes sense. I wasn't going to read questions. I was just going to kind of free flow, but I just want to make sure I ask you everything. So yeah, but in terms of the background, the stuff on your family history and stuff. I mean, some of it's it seems kind of unbelievable. You were Indira Gandhi was your cousin.
Yeah, she was Nehru.
Yeah,
was related. He
married your great grandmother.
Yeah, Kamala Kaul married Nehru. Nehru was related to my father's family.
Okay.
So that's
Okay. So your great grandmother married the first Prime Minister of India.
Correct.
Wow. Okay. And the Arjun Rising thing. I mean, it's from everything from the name of the book to the front cover. I mean, you kind of. I think you mentioned in the book that you tracked your life with this story of this guy that was in the.
He was Arjun was the prince in the Mahabharata and the Gita, and he basically found himself on a battlefield, and he was confronted with this war that was had it gone ahead would have involved him having to kill relatives, friends, families, members who were on the other side. And the Gita really it's a conversation of 18 verses between him and Lord Krishna. And the theme of the whole of the Gita is Arjun's duty to fight, and how he by not going into battle and by not going into the fight, he's derelicting his duty. And in life, and when we're talking about people's spiritual journey, it's all that one can do is adhere to one's duty. And so
do you feel you've fought, or do you feel you've not fought enough? I mean,
the reason that how the title came up actually was, Angelique asked me. She said, "Who gave you your names?" Because my first name is Richard and Arjun. I said, "My father gave me the name Arjun." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Oh, well, I never really asked him." I said, "Well, probably because I came out fighting." And I always remember from when I was, when I was growing up, I was always, kind of involved in, different types of battles with one entity or the other. So, he gave me this name without really knowing, I suppose, how I was going to turn out or how my life was going to turn out. But it just seemed interesting to me that, my life has seemed to have been kind of, one battle after the next, overcoming one hurdle after the next. So, that's the relevance of the 18 verses of the Gita. And
And then your mum features really heavily in the book. This is sort of like had a profound impact on you. And
yeah, it did actually. Yeah, everything. I think everything. Everything kind of. What's the word I'm looking for? Flows back to that event. Because, and it does because.
You were how old when she died?
I was 14. And it happened really suddenly how she died. But she was. And I talk about this in the book as well. I mean, the impact of her death upon me, because about a year before she had died, the school I was at, which was a place called St Mary's Grammar School, which is in Sidcup, there was a boy in my class called Peter Adams, and I remember one day we were in the bathroom, and he was standing there, and he was on my left, and he was crying, and I knew why he was crying. It was because his mother had just died, and I remember just kind of looking at him and just wondering to myself how it must feel. I couldn't imagine how it would feel to lose my mother.
Yeah.
And a year exactly to that date, my mother died, and so my biggest fear, which was losing my mother, I was now confronted with, and so when she died, there was. I was dealing with that fear, but there was also this sense of liberation that that I'd come face to face with something that I just couldn't imagine, and now I was dealing with it, and I saw her death as that critical point in my life, and also in my spiritual journey as well. So I kind of figured that if I could live through and deal with the person to who's most important to me, then everything else after that would be I would be able to overcome it.
Yeah. And what about? I mean, you go into some detail in the book about the way you have treated women in your lives in the past, like going back to when you were very young. I mean, the sort of strained relationships and stuff, and sort of flippant kind of attitude to women. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
I mean, this is from you. I mean, you've written all about this in the book in a lot of detail, and I wondered how much of that is. I mean, I'm no psychiatrist, but because of the mum thing, what happened to your mum so young?
Yeah.
Did that sort of put a wall up between you and women?
Yeah, it
because
did.
In some respects, I mean, you read it and you're like, holy crap, I can't believe you did that, or whatever,
It did. I mean, I think that I didn't trust women.
Yeah.
I think that's really what it came down to. I mean, on some very deep level, I must have interpreted her death as her abandoning me. Even though intellectually and consciously, of course, I knew that wasn't the case. But that's probably what was going on in a much more profound, subconscious or deeper fashion. And so, I mean, simply put, the pain that I had experienced when she died, that was, I would imagine a pain that I didn't really ever want to experience again. And I had associated that with women.
So you pushed them away?
Yeah.
Yeah. In addition to that, and then the character, your dad, who features in there as well. I mean, he comes across as, even though you clearly, have a sort of respect for him in terms of your lineage and the kind of Indian side of your family.
Yeah.
You also paint him as quite a difficult guy. I mean, he was a gambler and an alcoholic, and he beat your mum as well. I mean,
there were. Yes, I mean he had a problem with gambling and alcohol when he was younger, and the physical violence against my mother was something that happened more often. Actually, from what I remember when we were in England. But I understood, or all of those frailties in his character as just part of him being a human being. I didn't, he was my father, and I had great admiration and respect for him with many of the things that he had done, and I saw also those failings in him, but I didn't, interestingly, I didn't judge him negatively for those.
There was, and there's also going back. This is sort of just some kind of unrelated to what we're going to get onto, but I just was going to ask you about this. You're fairly graphic about your sex life in the book as well. And I thought that was going to kind of. I thought that there was going to be a reason for that. That at the end you hint at this sort of potential spiritual reawakening at the end. You actually, I think the words you use are. Well, I've actually written them down. I think you say, I can't even find it, but you sort of say that at some point, or my understanding was you sort of said at some point that it's going to make sense to you, or you're going to kind of have this, I guess you used the word spiritual.
Yeah.
But I wondered how that
ties into sexual.
Because that never sort of came full circle. It's like you had all this sex, and then it wasn't sort of like you never expressed a regret about the way you.
I agree. It's the way that it was put down in the book. You're right. It doesn't answer why that goes in. But the reason, after my mother had died, as I started to try to understand why it was that she had died, and what the answers were, and I started on this search, and it's what's life about? It's like really, what does it all mean? And so the sexual experiment was an attempt on my part to try and discover that, to see if the answers lay somewhere in the sexual experience, if that was going to bring me closer to understanding why it was that she had died and why it was that I was experiencing this pain.
So it was a way of combating the pain?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the... You say that... there's an interesting kind of thing you don't expand on in the book. You say that you found clinical medicine dull and medical school intellectually stifling, and you preferred theology, philosophy, cosmology. And there was something that later in the book you kind of hint on how you were interested in star signs and how they kind of related to the women you were with, and that kind of, there's a few things that you mentioned that a few times, and I've related it back to that kind of comment. And people might think that's a bit odd for a doctor to say that wasn't interested in clinical. I'm more interested in star signs than medicine. You have to actually, the way that I ended up in medicine, it wasn't that I was 15 or 16 and I decided I want to go to medical school. The school that I was at, the priests picked the boys that had done best in their O-levels, that they were going to go on to either into the Oxbridge track or go in to do medicine. And I didn't want to go up to Oxford or Cambridge, so they said, okay, well then we're going to put you on this medical track. So the priests decided that I was going to go off to medical school. And when I got to medical school, and this is a real truth about medical school, is that it's not a very intellectually stimulating academic practice, because it's just really a lot of memorization of facts. And I found it to be, I really did find it to be dull and boring, and that's why I was always, I read extensively with theology and philosophy and cosmology, and I was, to me those things were much more abstract and much more, I found a greater sense of creativity in those than in clinical medicine. But isn't there a sort of, there's a scientific method in medicine where, things are kind of peer-reviewed and we decide that works because it's been, double-blind studies and all the rest of it, whereas theology is sort of, arguably based on, well, it's just faith. I mean, it's blind faith. It comes to the point where there's not really any hard proof. It's just so it's just interesting to me that somebody who is you've made your career out of the scientific method.
Yeah.
But here's something that interests you because there's no method.
Yeah, but that's not completely correct, because the scientific method you're referring to is the scientific method of the Western world that came about in the sort of 17th and 18th century. But if you go back actually further to ancient Indian times, and you go back to the metaphysical theories and to the concepts of quantum mechanics that the ancient Hindu scripts talk about, actually theology, as we understand it today, does have a more empirical basis to it. It's not just, it's not just faith. It's not, theology is not religion.
Do you do transcendental meditation?
I do.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. I actually, from when I don't need. I can move myself, into those spaces fairly rapidly. So,
yeah. So you did the proper. You actually did proper TM, like not just something that's similar, kind of.
Yeah.
You did your. So you do your studies?
I do.
Really?
Yeah.
You didn't know I knew about that, did you? I know a lot about TM.
I'll tell you and again I kind of mention it briefly in the book. The first time that I ever had kind of an inkling or sort of that realization was when I was 5, and I had this experience with an apple.
Yeah.
Where I was with my mother, and she bought this bag of apples, and she gave me one, and they were the green Granny Smith apples.
Yeah.
And I remember biting into this apple, and it was in my hand, and I just remember looking at it, and saying to her, why is this apple me? I had this there were no boundaries, everything just kind of I was the apple and the apple was me, and she just kind of like looked down at me and just like nodded her head. But that was the first, and then I would have these moments between 5 and when my mother died when I was 14, where I would have that sense of there being no boundaries, just everything was one. And I it was just I couldn't make head nor tail of it.
Yeah.
But then when I was 14 and she died, that experience, suddenly that kind of like, the moment that she died, it was just like this huge light went off.
Yeah.
And all of these things that I'd been experiencing before suddenly began to make sense.
That's interesting. So this is not even for this story, but that's kind of interesting me now. So do you do TM in Manhattan? Where do you do it? Do you go and have your checked and stuff?
No, I did it in my apartment.
Oh, you do? Yeah. But you don't go to a TM centre or anything? No. Oh, okay. No. Who taught you?
My grandmother.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
I'm surprised that you know about.
Yeah, I know a lot about TM. You don't know Bob Roth, do you?
No.
Okay. Yeah, he's one of the heads of TM in the States. He's like the joint head with John Hagelin, who's the old quantum physicist, who's now like one of the heads of TM in America.
Well, have you seen the film, the documentary was done with Amit Goswami, the quantum activist?
Oh, is it called the quantum activist?
Quantum activist.
No,
it's a documentary about Amit Goswami, who is a theoretical physicist, and basically has has pulled together a very scientific explanation of transcendental meditation.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I've not seen that. There was a Nat Geo thing on it. There's another documentary, I can't remember what it's called, that features some of those guys in America, like John Hagelin and Bob Roth and people. I can't remember the name of it. It'll come to me. You talk about, you've got 2 kids. You also talk about you call her Simone in the thing. This girl that fell pregnant, and you said that she had a daughter. But did you ever find her?
No.
But you know that she exists.
Yeah.
Is that weird?
Yeah. It is weird.
Difficult.
Yeah.
It's hard for you. Let's go back to all that stuff in a minute. We'll go back to that. I want to kind of move on to the first thing that happened in the UK. Now, you did a fellowship in interventional pain, so that kind of was can you explain to me the difference between, or sort of how it overlaps? So, how did you go from anesthesiology to spine surgery?
Okay.
And presumably there was kind of like neurointerventional pain is kind of the
I did my residency in anesthesiology in the States, and that was a 3-year residency. And then I went back to England, and I was in Bristol for a year, and I did a fellowship in interventional pain at the Royal Infirmary. And during that fellowship, and also during the latter part of my anesthesiology residency, we were trained to perform certain procedures on the spine. And the first procedure we were trained to perform was this thing called a lumbar epidural steroid injection. And when those injections at that time were performed, to do those, you had to use a machine called a fluoroscopic C-arm, it's a mobile X-ray machine that allows you to visualize the spine and to place needles and probes into and around the spine. So the physicians or doctors who were trained in that way became very good at taking an instrument or a needle or probe and under X-ray guidance positioning it anywhere in and around the spine. Now, after I finished that fellowship, I continued to practice in that area, and then when I came back to the States in 2001, there was this emerging field of minimally invasive spine surgery. And the key component of minimally invasive spine surgery is fluoroscopic or X-ray guidance and interpretation, because everything that happens in minimally invasive spine surgery happens with the use of a C-arm, which allows there to be a much reduced incidence of muscle dissection and tissue destruction. So the procedures are carried out with the use of the C-arm. So I had been trained to use the C-arm, and I had been practicing with the C-arm. So when the MIS field began to evolve, I already had a lot of the skills necessary to perform minimally invasive discectomies and minimally invasive fusions. Now, the instruments as well themselves were changing, and the technology for the implants and the screws was changing as well. So, for example, in 1995, a pedicle screw, which is one of the devices that's used to stabilize the spine, could only be placed by making a wide open incision and dissecting away all the muscle. That's the only way the screw could be placed. But by 2001, 2002, they had developed pedicle screws that could be placed under X-ray guidance, so you didn't need to open up the back. And and around about that time as well, they also started to come up with interbody devices, which are these cages.
Which is the whatever it's called, the
Optimesh.
Optimesh.
Yeah.
Now this is all before, all this stuff that you're talking about and knowing about this and learning about this is before the incident in the UK?
No, this
the
is
training in terms of
the training. Training, yeah, correct, yeah.
Okay. So you said what are they screws called?
Pedicle.
Pedicle, and they're positioned using this X-ray machine as well. Are they?
Yeah, because when they designed the new screws, they designed them as cannulated screws. So there's a hole that goes down the centre of the screw, so you can place them by you place in a needle, and then everything kind of slides in over an initial locator needle.
Okay.
So these screws, these cannulated screws, allowed the screw to be placed under X-ray guidance, and without opening up the back. And similarly, the Optimesh, which is the interbody device, was.
And you use that to replace bone? Is that correct?
No, to replace discs. So
replace discs.
Yeah, when you're carrying out a fusion, the disc material, or the degenerated disc, is taken out from between the vertebrae,
Okay.
and the optomesh device is placed into that space,
Okay.
and then it's packed with bone and expands.
Now, we'll come to that because I wanted to ask you about that, because that obviously forms part of the case. But let's talk about well, first of all, the first sort of, I guess, kind of butting of heads was when the New Jersey board refused to accept, the General Medical Council refused to accept the American training. And that annoyed you because you make the point in the book that like it's almost like a slight on American medicine.
Yeah.
And that never got. I mean, did you have to? I don't know if I read that in the book. Did you have to? Did they eventually accept? They didn't ever accept?
No, they never accepted.
You had to retrain.
No, I didn't actually. What happened was when I went back to England in 1995, and the reason I had to go back to England was because I was here initially on a J1 visa.
Yeah.
So I had to go back for a period of at least 2 years. So my plan was to go back for the 2 years and then come back to the States. But then when I got back to England, I did the fellowship, and then I started to work privately in London, and I decided to stay on for a few more years in the UK. And one of the consultants said, well, if you're going to stay, you should try and get your American training recognised by the Royal College. So then I submitted this application, and the Royal College said, no, we don't consider your training to be equivalent to British training, and you will need to do a further 18 months of training in a British hospital to come up to UK standards.
Yeah.
So I felt that was unfair and incorrect, and I decided to appeal it. And that appeal took place in February 1999, and about a month later I got the decision back from the appeal panel, and they upheld the decision of the Royal College.
Yeah.
And then so at that point I then decided to come back to the States, and so I started to reactivate my paperwork, and was planning to come back to New York, and then it was in March of 1999 that Miss Bangura had the cardiac arrest, and then the investigation began, and that's.
Now, I've got tons of stuff. I don't need you to sort of go, repeat the whole thing about that, because you actually go into a lot of detail in the book about that, literally like, blow by blow account of what happened. But there was one sort of thing I was going to ask you, and that was that part of their case against you for manslaughter was that you were on your cell phone, and yet you presented mobile phone records that showed that you weren't. What did they say about that, or did they just not accept those phone records? Because it doesn't say that in the book exactly what.
No, they did. The prosecutor, William Boyce, and the CPS accepted that no mobile phone was being used.
They did. Okay.
Yeah, they accepted that.
Okay. So then, without the mobile phone usage, what?
That's exactly right, because that was the whole crux of their case, was that I was on this mobile phone, and that I was distracted. And when we proved that no mobile phone was being used, we thought there was going to be either dismissal or acquittal. And when the guilty verdict came back, I mean, it was a complete shock. I mean, there was no. It was. My solicitors and barrister and QC were surprised by the verdict, but there was nothing else to explain.
So it was on the testimony of the girl you call Mary in the thing, but it was something different. And she said that you were on your phone and that you weren't paying attention, and that she told you that there was something going wrong.
Yeah.
And that's what. So do you think, looking back, that the reason that they didn't acquit you was because, regardless of the mobile phone thing, that you still weren't paying attention? I mean, is that essentially what they were saying?
No, I think that I think the reason that they convicted me, and it was the most ridiculous. It was the only reason I could come up with, but the most ridiculous thing was when I first went under cross-examination by the William Boyce. He was quite clever in how he did this. I remember going up and sitting on the stand, and he said to me, he looked at me and he said, "Do you wear a watch?"
No, I remember this. Okay,
Yeah.
so you realised you'd got yourself into something where you thought it was just irrelevant. But
Yeah.
it was to do with working in the kitchen or working in the
office.
And you'd said it, and you realised afterwards, oh, perhaps I should have said that
Yeah.
I was working in the kitchen.
And so I think that detail, which I think, it attacked my credibility right from the beginning.
Okay.
I think that is what was the cause of the verdict, because at the end of the trial, and then also as well, I remember actually before we went back in for the verdict, my barrister had said to me, "Oh, the judge is under a lot of pressure." And I remember thinking, well, he's what pressure is he under, and why is he under any pressure? But his summing up to the jury was very weighted. It was a particularly biased summing up. And the jury couldn't agree on a unanimous verdict, so the judge instructed them that he would accept a majority verdict. But anyway, but I think the main reason for the guilty verdict was that detail where I. With the wristwatch and the time.
So he made you out to be a liar. You also seem to indicate that you think there was some sort of race played a part as well.
Yeah.
Do you still think that?
I do. I mean, I'm Indian, and that was a fact that was made clear during the trial. So I feel that I don't know if you followed it. It's not such a big issue now, but there used to be a lot of racism in the the National Health Service and in British medicine, and it's definitely, it was a big issue, and it settled down. But being a doctor, an Indian doctor, sometimes worked against you.
Okay. So you came to New Jersey, and you talk about well, actually, let's before we do that, you dealt with this really badly. I mean, this is sort of the beginning of the prescription meds problems and suicidal thoughts and stuff. I mean, that was how long? This went on for a long time. I mean, this was a really.
It did. I mean, it was. It was. I mean, it was, the whole experience in London was pretty traumatic. It was, I mean, the thing that I had a lot of difficulty with was, first of all, the fact that the patient had died.
Yeah.
And having experienced the loss of my mother, I understood very well what her family were going through. And at the end of the trial, when the verdict had come back, and the judge was basically, after he'd given his speech, I wanted to apologise to the family, but they weren't ready at that time to accept the apology. So that didn't happen. And then,
have you ever had a chance?
No, I haven't, and that's something that has always kind of stuck with me. But so I didn't get a chance to apologise to the family, and it was the family that actually, I didn't go to jail, and people, my solicitor was, he said, considering that, you were found guilty, and he said it was surprising that you didn't go to jail.
You seem to suggest that was some sort of vindication in the book, because you sort of you make the point that it's like, if they had really thought I'd done this, then they would have sent me to prison. But you'd still got a 6-month suspended sentence, and the judge made the point of sort of saying, your career's in ruins. I mean, that's punishment enough. I mean, that seemed to be what he was saying, that you didn't need to go down for it.
Yeah, I you're right. I do interpret it to an extent in that way. It just didn't make any sense. It was because before we had, my solicitor said to me, actually, he said, look, if you get found guilty, expect a jail term. And that was, so I was preparing myself for that if the guilty verdict came back. And then when the guilty verdict did come back and I didn't go to jail, everyone was surprised. And so, I was, my interpretation of that was, if I was truly guilty of this crime, why was it that I wasn't sent to jail?
So you think it was sending you a message that it was sort of all the reasons you thought you were being prosecuted, which is that it was the same guy that was at the hospital that she was taken to, that
Strunen.
Right, and then the race thing, and then all these things combined. Do you think it was a sort of almost like a political decision?
Yeah. It was. It was. I had challenged the Royal College, and it had gotten some media attention, and it was a bit of a contentious case with this guy Strunen.
Yeah.
And it was about a month after that Miss Bangura had the cardiac arrest and died, and did so at his hospital.
Yeah.
So it was an own goal.
Okay, so then you went to New Jersey, and you go into detail about this in the book as well. And I think that some people reading it might think, I remember when I read it, I sort of was kind of thinking, what are you doing? Because you talk about this form where it says, and my reading of it was, here's a question that at first I'm thinking, well, of course you can't put that you've never had any convictions. And then you sort of look for this you look in the fine print essentially and see that it says federal or state. So you think, okay, I'm good. And it's almost, I think as a reader, trying to detach myself, I'm thinking, but come on, it's spirit of the law versus letter of the law. You know what they mean. But then you explain that your life is in ruins and your career is in ruins if you don't say that you haven't got a conviction. So you put I haven't got a conviction because technically you didn't in a federal court or a state court. But you still knew that you did, and that they'd probably need to know that.
Right.
But you did it. I mean, can I play devil's advocate and say that it was quite a selfish move? Do you think, looking back, because you knew it was purely for your own career that you put I didn't have a conviction, knowing that if they knew that, they probably wouldn't have hired you or renewed your license.
I think when I get into discussions about this point with people, and I'm explaining it, I always ask the person who's asking me that question, what they would have done, what would have been their course of action. And to be honest with you, at that time, I felt that I had been treated very unfairly by a system, and my life, I was only 35, 36 at that time. It didn't look particularly pretty. And so, when I was filling out the application, and I read the questions closely and carefully, I answered the questions as they were asked. So I agree with what you're saying. Some people will look at it and say, well, you should have complied with the spirit of the law. But the way that I looked at it at that point in time was that I was answering the questions as they were exactly asked, and in the context of what I had just gone through and what I was potentially looking at. Was
there a sort of feeling of I've stuck it to the man back in the UK, because they've done this, which I feel was unjustified, and I've managed to basically they didn't give me a prison sentence because they said your career's over, and here you were embarking on a whole new career in the States, and you sort of.
No, I didn't feel that. I didn't have. There was none of. It wasn't that at all. I was. As I started, I think I was 35 or 36, and I was, thinking, okay, so what do I do? I've got to pick myself back up, and I've got to get on with my life, and it was. I just wanted to, to move on.
And then tell me if the chronology is wrong here, but the board eventually found out somebody had written to them from
Strunen.
He'd written to them from London.
From London.
Okay. How do you say his last name?
Strunin, S-T-R-U-N-I-N.
And what's his first name?
Leo.
Is he still practicing? Leo Strunin.
Leo Strunin, yeah. I don't know if he's...
What was his job?
He was the president of the Royal College.
Okay. But he wrote to the board and
contacted, and they received a written communication.
Written communication, and he basically said, "Watch out! This guy's, falsified his."
Well, let them know about the case in England.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
And when they found out, they called you up. And they struck you off again gave you a suspension again.
No. Yeah. So what happened was the medical board in New Jersey found out, and then they sent me a letter. Then there was a hearing. I went before the board. There was a full day's hearing, and they ended up suspending my license for 6 months, but not based upon the conviction in England, but based upon the fact that I hadn't disclosed details about the case in England.
But you said that you make it very clear that you didn't have to because it wasn't a federal or state case. They didn't agree with that.
They
went
exactly.
along the lines of the spirit rather than the letter.
I testified that when I answered the questions, I understood the questions to be relevant to convictions in a state or a federal jurisdiction.
And that's when they said this thing about how it's not normal that you'd get a lawyer to help you with that, although they made some comment about that. It's very unusual for you to get an attorney to help you with that or something.
Yeah.
You just fill in a simple questionnaire.
Yeah. Well, I didn't get an attorney to help me complete that form.
Right.
I retained attorneys after the medical board had sent me the letter.
Okay. Fair enough, yeah. So 6 months suspension, and you do describe what you did in those 6 months and stuff. You sort of go back into sort of personal life and visiting people and sort of just trying to kind of like fill that time.
Yeah.
Your brother was then, this whole Viagra thing happened, and this was sort of presumably just a way of sort of making money in the interim because you knew you couldn't work, so you did this business. Do you still feel, how do you feel? You make the point briefly in the thing about how you've always felt guilty about that. He actually went to prison for a year. That was, I write about prison. It's not a nice place. How did he cope, and what did he tell you afterwards? And presumably you're still talking. You were close to him.
I was close to him.
But was he resentful that you kind of got away with this because you kind of absconded to America and didn't have to go?
No, he wasn't. He wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah, not at least that I sensed, but he felt. He still felt bad for me that I had gone through what I'd gone through.
Do you have any regrets about that? Is there anything you'd have done differently? You make the point in the book about how you felt that it was again unjustified, that you hadn't done anything wrong because you were filling in prescriptions. But again, is it a case of spirit versus letter? And if I was to email you and say, "Hey, Richard, I'm in California. I know you never met me, but I really need this prescription of Viagra," and my understanding is you then just prescribe it online. You don't have to see this person in the flesh. As a doctor, is that legit, or did you sort of, looking back, do you think, okay, maybe that we shouldn't have done that?
I've never considered that.
Really?
I don't think. I think at the time when Viagra first came out and the GMC were coming up with their guidelines on prescribing, it was within those guidelines. There wasn't any deviation from any GMC guidelines about prescribing to patients over the internet.
Okay, but why did why did he get found guilty of?
Well, he should. After I had come back to the States, he shouldn't have continued.
Because he wasn't
to run that company.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah. But did you? That was an issue though. The prescription thing, right? That came up, did it? The fact that you were prescribing over the internet, was that never an issue?
No, that was never an issue.
But the Medicines Control Agency didn't approve that, did they? just generally, not in your case, but just generally, the whole of prescription drugs over the internet.
That was the.
I feel like that's a thing. I mean, that they kind of clamped down on that.
Yeah, that was.
I've written about it years ago. I wrote something about a guy in New Jersey, not New Jersey, in Jersey, the island of Jersey, that was doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And the Medicines Control Agency were investigating him because it was sort of, you could just email them and say, oh,
Yeah.
Well, whatever.
Yeah, the internet prescribing thing has changed.
So it's changed in the interim.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But it was okay. So that makes sense. That and then your license got you were able to practice again. Now, while in that 6 months, you also went to Korea.
Yeah.
And that's where you did this 1 month minimally invasive spine surgery thing.
Fellowship. Yeah.
Fellowship. And now, is this the one where, because this formed part of the case, but you were practicing on cadavers in Seoul, or no?
No, on live patients.
On live patients.
Yeah, live patients.
Because I thought that was a point of the later on the case was that you had never practiced on a live patient. That came up in the.
Yeah, no. In the hearing before the administrative law judge, I described actually being involved in live cases, about 25 of them.
And did they accept that?
They did.
Okay, and tell me about that thing. Because I mean, their case against you essentially was that you didn't have the necessary training.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. Tell me why you think you did and why they think you didn't.
Okay.
And I mean, it's difficult for me to sort of understand that.
To answer and to understand that, you have to understand what's involved in the procedure.
Okay.
Technically, and as I described before, the most important part of these procedures is the use of the X-ray machine. So it's called fluoroscopic guidance and interpretation. So that accounts for 90 to 95% of the procedure, because you have to be able to use the C-arm and interpret the images to be able to properly place the screws or the devices. So my position was, I've been using the C-arm since 1994. I've been trained on.
Is it C, the letter C, and then arm?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been trained on how to place needles and probes extensively. I've done thousands of cases, and the evolution from interventional pain into minimally invasive spine is a very logical and natural one, because it goes from placing a needle to placing a probe and to placing a device, but using the same fluoroscopic technique. So as compared to, say, a neurosurgeon whose training does not involve the use of fluoroscopic guidance and interpretation, or training in fluoroscopic guidance and interpretation. So my argument, my position was, I'm much more appropriately trained to perform these types of procedures than is a neurosurgeon who's only been trained to take out discs or put in screws by opening up the back and taking out muscle and bone. And that in fact is, the expert that they had brought, this guy called Przybylski, that in fact was how he had been trained. And even and during the hearing, he even admitted that his training in minimally invasive spine surgery started in 2005, and it was significantly less than my training. And he even, and this was the crux of the case, and this was why it was so, again, it was kind of shocking that we lost, was Przybylski admitted that there are no standards for education and training in minimally invasive spine surgery.
Who said that?
Their expert, Gregory Przybylski.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he even admitted that there are no standards, because it's such a new speciality that there haven't been any standards defined as to what constitutes proper training, and that the way that Przybylski himself obtained training in MIS was by going to the same types of courses that I had gone to.
Now, if we put aside the training, I mean, there was one, and this is going through the the stuff from the case, there was one doctor, I can find it, where is it? Well, I mean, let's go through some of the stuff they said and just give you can just sort of explain to me what your sort of response was to this, or is in a way that we could understand it if we're not doctors. We've done the training. There was one thing where they talked about inserting screws in the spinal canal and failing to remove the stimulant after infection, using the Optimesh as a structural device. That's several things, and then the patient consent form is unsigned. So let's go through those. So inserting the screws, and there was one doctor who they got to take the stand who said, he called it grossly negligent, but he said, Dr. Nazif testified, the screws were in a place I've never seen before. When you're not in bone, it's grossly abnormal.
Right.
What did you...
So he's talking, the patient that he was referring to was a patient with the initials are TZ.
Yeah.
I think that was the patient. And the argument, and this is in the testimony of the hearing. When I placed the screws and I placed the interbody device, throughout the procedure, we're taking X-rays constantly. So there was about 30 or 40 X-rays or images that were produced during the procedure. And at the end of the procedure, before the patient is discharged, there's images obtained. And so we presented those images, and they showed that the screws and the interbody devices were properly placed. So our expert said, look, it's not unusual sometimes for screws to actually displace once the patient is up and moving about. It does happen. Okay. So when Nazif, or when she went to see Nazif says, the screws were misplaced, but he never took any images intraoperatively of how displaced the screws were.
So they could move after post-op?
Yeah, no, so the two things were, one, it's feasible that they could have moved after the surgery, but two, it was just his word that the screws were misplaced. He actually never took any images intraoperatively to show that they were in where he was saying that they were. Okay, and then with this mesh device, and again, this is just my understanding of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was in the hearing, you relied on testimony from the manufacturer who said they can be used for this, but what the prosecution said, I don't know if you call them prosecution, and it's probably not, it's whatever they're called. The Attorney General. Was saying that that may be well, but the FDA doesn't approve. Have said that this is not tried and tested. This this is what's referred to as off-label. And 80% of medicines and 80% of devices are used in America in an off-label fashion. Yeah. So, this is, and even Przybylski himself, the expert for the state, admitted that he used devices in an off-label fashion. So, when the rep came in, Bob McGann, I think he testified and said about 30,000 implants. Optimesh devices have been placed, and he had a couple of hundred surgeons who regularly place them. I mean, it's the same thing as aspirin is used in an off-label fashion when you give it to people who have cardiac problems. That's an off-label use. What about the patient consent forms? Did you admit to any of these? No, they were signed. They were signed. Yeah, and the one patient consent form, it was only one. It was a patient GH, or George Houseman. We actually found that they couldn't find that consent form, but when we submitted the post-trial submissions, we actually located the consent form, and that was submitted with the file. Post-trial? Yeah, there was after the trial had finished, the attorneys were given 60 days to submit these post-trial submissions, and so George Houseman's consent form, which was located, it had been signed, was submitted with that. So they tried to make out that there were multiple patients for whom consent forms hadn't been signed, but there was only one patient George Houseman that we initially couldn't find the consent form on, but that we did subsequently find the consent form on.
But you presumably didn't show them the other consent forms either, did you?
No, they were. They were presented.
They saw them.
Yeah, they were presented.
What about this thing about the only certification they recognised was the anaesthesiology certification?
Yeah, well, in America there's what's called there's the American Board of Medical Certification, which is AMBC, and then non-AMBC certifications. So with minimally invasive spine surgery, there is no recognised fellowship in minimally invasive spine surgery. So when a doctor wants to get training or wants to get education in minimally invasive spine surgery, he goes and undertakes the same types of courses that I had undertaken since 2002. And Przybylski himself, who was their expert, admitted that that was how he had obtained his training.
Okay. Well, there was something in there I just noticed in the paperwork. It said you declined the opportunity to make oral arguments. Do you regret not doing that? Do you think that would have helped? Had you?
We made oral arguments.
There was something in there that said you declined to make them. Maybe I misread that. I thought that they said you declined. You just wanted to rely on the formal submissions, the paperwork submission. I don't know what it meant by that. Maybe that was in the review afterwards. The final.
We had the hearing, which lasted
So I think they were referring to the. I think it was referring to the. They did a. I don't know what it's called. Not a review, but the when it was like everything was affirmed and they fined you another 300k.
In front of the medical board.
Yeah. What about the admitting privileges? You admitted you didn't have admitting privileges and you should have done because you're assistant.
This thing with privileges again. It's kind of the regulations in New Jersey are kind of confusing and themselves weren't clear. So what I made clear during the hearing was that throughout the years that I'd been building up my practice, and when I opened up the surgical centre, I had always used attorneys and consultants to guide me on how to structure my practice and how to open the centre. So when we were opening the centre, my attorneys reached out to the medical board and said, does he need alternative privileges for these procedures? The medical board said no, they're not included on this list. So that's why I was able to go ahead and open up the centre, and that's why the centre also obtained Medicare certification and AAA accreditation. So before my surgical centre opened up and I started doing these procedures, I was fully credentialed by Medicare, by AAA HC, which was the accrediting organisation, and prior to that, the centres that I had carried out these procedures, the other surgical centres, they had formally credentialed me as well. So I didn't ever go into a facility and perform discectomies or fusions without being credentialed in those centres.
So you disagree that your lack of training precluded you from attempting spine surgery in any form, which was their exact wording. You disputed everything.
Yeah. And the thing that I would say is, today in New Jersey, there's hundreds of other doctors who have the same training and background as me, who are now performing these procedures. So and across the country, I mean, it's spine surgery has changed. It's the same. The example that I give is look at what happened in cardiac care. About 25 years ago, when people had a cardiac problem, they went to see a heart surgeon and their chest was opened. But the interventional cardiologists took over. So now most procedures on the heart are carried out by interventional cardiologists. And so it's the same, it's the same kind of battle and the same evolution as in spine. I mean,
and you're saying because it was a new field, there weren't like sort of formal qualifications for it.
Correct. There wasn't. There wasn't. there were no standards. There wasn't one specific qualification or one specific program, and there still aren't. They still haven't. Those still haven't been created.
You said that you alleged that there was the court transcripts were altered. There was political influence.
Yeah.
You still stand by that. Tell me a bit about that, because that doesn't. There's no detail on that in the.
No. Well, I had been doing these procedures, these discectomies and fusions, in the state of New Jersey from 2002, 2003, and there had been no problems, none at all. The state medical board knew that I was doing these procedures because every 2 years I would have to renew my application for my license and submit, my a form with the cases I had done and the work I was doing. So there'd been no issue. Now, Christie gets elected into the governor's office in 2009, and suddenly it becomes a problem. And I didn't just kind of like, this thing about the political corruption didn't just, wasn't like a thought that popped into my head. I was trying to work out what had happened, what had changed, and a number of my patients who were involved in New Jersey politics came in and started to tell me, listen, this is what went on. Christie was given money by a small group of neurosurgeons, and in response or in return, they asked him to ask the medical board to take action against you.
Against you?
Against me, because
not just you, but a few.
Well, against me, because I was the most, I was the most
high profile.
Yeah, high profile guy, and also because I had this case from England, and so I already had a mark on my record, so that sort of made me an easy target. But because but more because I was advancing what interventional pain physicians could do. So the fact that I was performing these procedures and doing them safely and doing them well and having patients have good outcomes, made me an obvious target.
Except for these 11.
Well, let's.
You think that was part of the political?
Yeah, the 11 patients they talk about, Alex. Out of that 11, there were only 3 patients that actually had any defined injury after the surgery. And when you look at the numbers and you look at the fact that I performed, in this time period, 6,000 spine procedures. I performed 800 of these minimally invasive spinal procedures.
6,000 or 8?
The total spine procedures 6,000.
Yeah.
And with the fusions and discectomies, 800.
Sorry, what's that word? So 800 fusions
and discectomies.
How do you spell that second word?
DISCECTOMIES.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So when the medical board first filed the complaint, I said to them through my attorney, I said, look, if they have concerns about my skills or about my technique, then why don't they come up and analyse my practice, send a monitor in so they can watch me, and do that for 3 to 6 months, and put me on a monitoring program. But they weren't interested in that. It wasn't a case of we really genuinely think the guy doesn't know what he's doing. So. And the fact that the board had known about me doing these cases for all of these years, but then suddenly only in 2009, when Christie came into office, did it now become an issue?
Did you have any evidence for that, the Christie thing?
The only evidence was patients coming in and telling me. Yeah.
How the patients were involved in New Jersey politics?
Yeah, they're involved in the Republican Party in New Jersey.
And they wouldn't speak about it now.
No.
Why not?
Because I suppose Well, I don't know if they would speak about it now, but at the time they wouldn't. Because they told me they were. I suppose felt intimidated or scared, or they didn't want to have anything impact upon them, but. You even sent a letter to Obama. Yeah.
What did that letter say?
Well, it said that, I wanted the federal government to investigate the fact that these transcripts had been altered, and the only way that I found out about this was because I had brought my own transcriptionist to court. When I first went down before the medical board in June 2012, my attorney at that time brought down his own transcriptionist, and he said to me, I'm going to bring in my own transcriptionist because they have a habit of tampering with the transcripts. So I remember just thinking that was an odd thing. I'd never heard of that. It was just, what I just couldn't, it just seemed kind of shocking to me that would have to happen. But I remember it very clearly, and so when Przybylski came in to testify, on those days I brought in my own transcriptionist, and I remember when the transcriptionist came in, the judge got all bent out of shape, and he was like, we're only going to follow the court transcript, and it was, it definitely flustered the judge. But I'm glad I did it, because what it demonstrated was that at the key point in his testimony where he admitted that there are no standards, they had changed that, and my transcript indicated what he said, and their transcript was...
What was the bit? Because I remember in the review it said that there was no substantial difference between the transcripts.
The medical board tried to downplay it by saying that... So this is the thing, the medical board admitted that there were differences in the transcript, but in their opinion they tried to say there were no substantial differences.
And what was the main difference you said?
About this admission, because Przybylski said there are no standards for training in minimally invasive spine surgery. That was the crux of the case. He admitted that. So in their transcript they had changed that, or almost deleted it, where he was varicating on that. But in my transcript it indicated that he actually said that. So it was, and then there were a couple of other inconsistencies between the two transcripts.
Your response. I mean, your response was, and they actually called it. I can't remember the words they used, but I mean, you essentially said you vowed to get back into the operating room, and you set up the Kaul-Nine-The Institute. What was their reaction to that? And I know the Spine Africa thing, they kind of had some stuff to say about that as well. They wanted to totally discredit and destroy anything that I was associated with. So the New Jersey Medical Board, by attacking the Spine Africa project and by attacking the Kaul-Nine-The Institute, wanted to stop me from, practicing anywhere in the world. I mean, that really was their intention. And what happened as a result of that? You're still doing Spine Africa. Are you still doing Kaul-Nine-The?
I mean, the Spine Africa.
Just Spine Africa.
Yeah.
So Kaul-Nine-The is no longer.
Is no longer.
So Spine Africa, and what about here? I mean, you were suspended, right, as a result of this, permanently, or?
It was revoked.
It was revoked.
Yeah.
The suspension was revoked.
Yeah. The license.
The license was revoked. So you are not able to practice medicine in New Jersey, or you? Medicine.
Yeah.
So how come we're here today?
The business, which I was allowed to hold on to, explains this office here. So there's other doctors working for the practice.
Okay.
But I'm just not allowed to clinically practice myself.
Okay, so you basically manage the business.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about Spine Africa? Tell me about that.
Well, I mean, it's...
it was a trip to Kenya, right?
There's been multiple trips to Africa, to the DRC.
But I mean, sorry, when you... To the first...
Yeah, to Ethiopia.
It was Ethiopia. And you went there and you saw this need and you decided this is something we can really help with, because...
Yeah, that first trip was in 2008.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's when the idea started. And then... it kind of became incorporated in 2010, 2011, and then I obtained 501c3 status in 2011. But the people, I mean the people who I worked with in Africa, in the DRC, have been very supportive of me throughout this whole procedure.
They're aware of everything.
Oh yeah.
Now you said that you had performed on people like with brain tumours and presumably done open surgery and is there an argument to say tell me about that? No, I didn't say I performed on. I thought there was something. There's something in the book that says you. I just wrote down. You said we operated on people with brain tumours.
Oh no, in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
With hydrocephalus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was working there with a neurosurgeon. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. No, I wasn't trying to. I just wondered what you were doing. What you do in Spine Africa? Because that's not a spine. That's. I'm really going to sound ignorant now, but that's nothing to do with the spine, is it?
It's kind of part of the spine because the ventricular system comes into the spine, so it's an abnormality of the spine.
So it's not just spines you deal with. You deal with any.
No, it is spines, just spines.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. So hydrocephalus is part of that.
Yeah, it's part of the the circulating system of the spine.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a blockage in the ventricular system, which leads to the collection of fluid in the ventricles in the brain.
Why is there a problem there? I mean, this is just a lack of medical care, right? And in places where they just can't afford this stuff, and
it's malnutrition, and they don't have access to care.
Yeah. And I guess what the point is that because of this new way of doing this surgery that's minimally invasive, you can do this a lot cheaper and easier than you would have been able to 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
You can have patients in and out of the hospital or the clinic on the same day.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and their recovery is a lot faster.
And what sort of percentage of your working life is kind of devoted to that now, Spine Africa, and what percentage is managing this?
Up until recently, it was mostly managing this, but it's going to be moving towards predominantly the Spine Africa project.
Are you winding up here?
Yeah. Well, you mean
this business?
The business, yeah.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
When is that?
That's probably going to happen over the next 3 to 6 months.
Yeah. And that's because of what happens, but it happened basically. It's just difficult for you to do.
Yeah, it's directly because of what happened.
Yeah. And what about you? How has this affected you, like personally? And I'm thinking, obviously professionally. You can't practice here and you can't practice in the UK. So, how has it impacted you? How has it impacted you mentally as well? Because you've been through some stuff before. And financially, if you don't mind going into these darker places.
It's had a huge impact on me, financially, and the stress of having to go through all these legal proceedings again has had an impact. But I kind of I just look at these hurdles and challenges as just that. I've gone through significant obstacles in my past, and I've overcome them and navigated through them. And with what's happened to me here, I don't feel as if I've done anything wrong. I feel as if I've been the victim of, unfortunately, a corrupt system here that came after me because I was building a successful practice, and because I was moving medicine forward in a way that entrenched interests didn't want. But it has been difficult. It's to have to come back from a situation and build up your life over 10 years and then have it attacked again. It's tough.
What about you? Where will you be in 5 years' time? Are you going to stay in America, or are you going to go live somewhere else? And what's your sort of plan? Can you operate Spine Africa out of the States?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be spending more time in Africa, but I've got 2 children here, so I'll still continue to spend time here as well.
How old are your kids?
11 and 9.
But you won't be able to work here on,
No.
you don't want to. You're not.
Yeah, not in clinical medicine, and I wouldn't want to. Not after what I've gone through.
You talked about wanting Richard Branson to be involved. Did you ever reach out to him?
No, I haven't actually reached out to him, but he has a great affinity for Africa, and but it would be great to have him involved.
Do you think that's likely?
I don't know. I mean, it's possible.
What about the civil lawsuits? There's some of these patients that have sued, and also insurance companies, Geico and stuff. What's happened? What stage is that? Are they all over now and settled?
No, they're being litigated.
They are being litigated.
Yeah.
How many are being litigated?
There's about 6, 7.
Oh God. Have you got any money to pay if they win?
No, I mean, this is, I've got attorneys who are saying to the other side, look, if you get a judgment, you're not going to get anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about your properties? You've had to get rid of everything?
Yes, I had a house in Manhattan which I had to sell. And then I have, I still have 2 properties here.
What about attorney's fees? I mean, it's not cheap.
It's not. I mean, the whole thing in terms of lost earnings and legal fees and it's well over 10 million.
Wow.
It's a lot of money.
You seem remarkably calm.
That's my transcendental meditation.
What about? I mean, again, I'm sort of playing devil's advocate here, but if you come and sit down and talk to you, and you make a very compelling argument, and you're obviously a very personable guy and all the rest of it, but if you were just to tell somebody, sort of sum up the story, not you or me, but somebody, a third party, was to say to somebody over a drink, there's this guy who was found guilty of manslaughter in England. He moved to New Jersey, where he injured 11 patients. He was struck off and fined. Then they started suing him, and then insurance companies sued. Oh, and his brother went to prison for some deal that they had in the UK. But he's not accepted any liability. He thinks he's the victim in all this. And then he wrote a book about himself. People might say that's quite sort of narcissistic. And what's your response to that? I mean, you must have been. I'm obviously not telling you something that you haven't heard before. I mean, I just wondered what, regardless of what you told me in terms of.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I agree. Everyone, is going to have a different opinion, and if telling the story as you've just told it, I agree. It's not it doesn't leave you with a good feeling. But that's why one of the reasons why I wrote the book, and that is the reason why I wrote the book, is to paint a fuller picture. But there will be people who will say, I come off as narcissistic and self-serving.
Are you?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that when I came back from England to the States, and I started to build up my practice here. I started to do well financially, so I did a lot of charity work here and treated a lot of patients, who had no medical insurance, and did that for free, and helped patients. And then as I started to do better, I took my own money and used that to set up the Spine Africa project, and to take that and to do something positive with that in a part of the world where people had no health care. So I don't think I am. I think that I've had some very bad luck, with a case in England. I mean, over the many years, the 25 years that I've been in practice, I've helped and treated, thousands and thousands of patients, and there aren't many doctors who get to the point in their career who haven't had a patient who's passed away, or where they've had bad outcomes. So I think that there's a standard that they were trying to hold me to with this recent case, which if they were to hold every other doctor to the same standard, then all these other doctors would be out of practice. I mean, so I don't think I am. I think that when these cases happened, it was definitely easy to paint me out to be the bad guy. But I don't. I think I've just had some very bad luck, and that's why I come up. I mean, that's why when you tell the story and you kind of just tell those details, it does seem.
But you're not going to give up, though. You're not going to. You don't want to be defeated. I mean, by putting everything into Spine Africa, do you feel that there's a shot at sort of redemption in the public's eyes, even though you say you haven't done anything wrong? Do you think that there's a way of rehabilitating your image by just doing this, by focusing on the charity and doing something which you consider, or do you think this is going to come back to bite you, because people will still say, well, he's still the same guy who they say hasn't qualified, and now he's just doing the same thing to people that can't afford it in Africa?
Yeah, no, I don't. I'm not doing it to for any redemption in the public side. I'm doing it because it was something. This was something that I started before this whole thing happened with the New Jersey Medical Board. It started, out of a genuine desire to use my skills and my expertise and my resources to help.
Yeah. So
my, the motivation for the Spine Africa project was, in my opinion, it was completely pure. It wasn't, I'm trying to gain points or do anything. It was like I wanted to help.
What do you think is going to happen? I mean, if you could sort of take a sort of stab at, predicting. I mean, are you worried your property is going to be taken away and you'll be left with nothing, or is that kind of they can't take them because they're are you worried at this stage or about that sort of stuff, or do you think you're going to be okay? I mean, what?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I take a wide view of all of these things. When I was 14 years old, and I lost my mother. It's kind of, you wonder where your life is going to go from there. It's like everything seemed so black and bleak, and it seemed insurmountable. But I was able to move through that situation, to navigate past it. And I'm not a particularly materialistic type of individual. So with the properties and my houses, and they're not going to just take them from me. There's a process that they'd have to go through, and there'd be legal battles over that. But that's not going to it's not going to stop me or to paralyze me. And I mean, I have to look at my situation, and I say to myself, well, I've got 2 children that I have to continue to support. So, I don't have, the luxury of just kind of giving up and saying, well, I'm,
or escape into a different country or something.
Yeah. So, and I really.
So you're not going to run away, basically.
No, I mean, and with what's happened with me recently with the New Jersey Medical Board, I still feel that I did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
And the way I look at it is, if I had, when they first started this nonsense, if I had packed my bags and run away, I think that would have communicated to people that I was trying to hide something or guilty of something, but that's not the case.
I want to check if I've missed anything. How long have I kept you? This was long, wasn't it? I told you it'd only be 45 minutes. Is there anything you want to add?
No, that's pretty clear.
What about you talk a lot. I mean, one of the themes of the book is you overcoming the prescription drugs thing and drugs generally. But have you, because of, I mean, that was sort of the book kind of finishes before all this stuff happened. I mean, it kind of touches on, I'm assuming that it was pretty much written before, the bulk of it was written before this. So has that been a problem? Like, have you wanted to kind of, has there been how do I put this?
No.
A chance of relapsing because of that, because of what's happened? Okay.
Yeah, no.
And is that tough? I mean, is it every day tough doing that? Because I mean, you hear.
No, I again, it was. I had a problem that I sought help for, and I was able to overcome it, and I haven't had any desires or felt any need to go back to do that. Yeah.
I think that's it. There was no surprises, were there? I mean, you probably kind of anticipated doing the whole gamut, right? Was it? Well, that wasn't too painful, was it?
No.
How long?